So you're looking to buy your very first guitar. And this could be a guitar for yourself, or maybe it's a guitar for a loved one, a family member, a friend, and maybe you don't play guitar at all, or maybe you don't play guitar very well. Maybe you don't know what to look for in terms of electronics or body shapes. You don't know what makes a good beginner guitar, or you don't know what mistakes to avoid, and you don't know what to buy. So hopefully my video is going to help answer some of these questions. So maybe your first guitar experience is going to be a little bit more positive than mine was. Now let's talk about my top 5 mistakes to avoid when buying your first guitar and why your very first guitar should be... Whoa, before we get there, let's talk about my very first guitar, mistakes I made when I chose it, and what I learned from it, so maybe you could avoid making the same mistakes I did. I started playing guitar pretty late in the game. I think I was somewhere around 17, 18 when I made my first attempt, and really it took me multiple starts across multiple years before it actually stuck. Learning guitar isn't necessarily easy, even though it is one of the easier instruments to pick up compared to the violin. It can be really difficult and really daunting regardless. You need quite a bit of coordination and it can be a lot. This is why I think your first guitar is really important. Now, fortunately, my first guitar was quite good. Now, when I chose this specific guitar, I didn't really know a whole lot about electric guitars at all. I tried playing on an acoustic guitar a little bit. It was a really poor acoustic and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anything about electronics. I didn't know anything about nuts and bridges, about anything. But what I did know was that my favorite band at the time was Korn. All of Korn's members were playing Ibanez guitars, so I wanted an Ibanez guitar. I was also a massive System of a Down fan, and I remember seeing Darren Malakian playing Ibanez Iceman for a very long time, and I was a massive Ibanez fan, so I knew that I wanted an Ibanez. It didn't really matter how well it played, how well it sounded. So I went into the guitar store with my dad and I saw this Ibanez. It was really nice and dark and it has a bit of a shine to it. It was a very pretty looking guitar and I just said, that's the guitar I want. After a bit of back and forth with my dad, who thought I should maybe get something a bit more versatile, we ended up buying the Ibanez guitar that I really loved. And I think it's a really good beginner instrument, but there are a few different things that I wish I would have looked out for when I got it. So let's talk about 5 different things that I think you should look for when you buy your first guitar. Number 1 is the bridge. Number 2, the nut. Number 3, simplicity. Number 4, versatility. And then number 5 is build quality. The biggest mistake I think I made with my first guitar was buying a guitar with a floating bridge. I recorded a lot of footage explaining what the floating bridge is and why it's not suitable for beginners in my opinion, but I ended up with a lot of footage and it turns out it would probably need its own video. But what you need to know is that they're really temperamental. The tuning stability is worse. Changing strings is a lot harder. Intonating a guitar with the floating bridge is harder. It's just more work, harder to do, fiddly sort of stuff. So you'd probably best avoid them altogether. Okay, let's talk about mistake number 2, and that is buying a guitar with a nut that wasn't filed properly. Having a guitar with the properly filed nut is really important because the nut sets the height of the string compared to the fretboard. And as a new guitar player, you're likely going to be playing, for the most part, cowboy chords. And the cowboy chords are your A minor, A major, C, E minor. And once you learn some of these chords, you're going to unlock a lot of possibilities on the guitar. And you're going to be spending a lot of time playing on frets 1, 2, and 3. And that is where a poorly filed nut has the most impact. You would have a harder time fretting notes without creating any buzz or any noise, and learning how to play guitar is hard enough as it is without making it harder on yourself by having a guitar with a poorly filed nut. Let's talk about how to determine whether a nut was filed correctly or not. What I would recommend is going into a guitar store, and I think for your very first guitar you should actually get to touch the guitar that you're about to buy, whether it's new or it's secondhand, and you should ask to see one of the pricier guitars. Let's say something like a Mexican Fender or one of the more expensive Epiphones or the cheaper Gibsons, American Fenders, something like that. You want to get a good point of reference. So I'm going to demonstrate that with my Baum Backwing guitar, which is currently my fanciest guitar. And I recommend you pick up the guitar you take one of your fingers, preferably the ring finger, you press down on the sixth or the thickest string, and you have a look at the distance between the string and the first fret. The worse the quality, the further away the string is going to be from the nut. Now, obviously, you can check this on all 5 strings, but you should get a reasonably good frame of reference by just checking on a more expensive guitar and seeing whether the guitar that you're about to buy measures up okay, or whether it looks like it's floating above the fret miles away. Now, realistically, you can replace the nut, and it's not really that difficult to do. You could also take your guitar to a guitar technician and they can file the nut to proper height. The nut material is also reasonably important, but the point is, if you're buying a brand new guitar, you might not want to replace the nut straight away or replace parts on it, especially if it's your first guitar. So I think buying something with a good nut is a really good place to start. Okay, mistake number 3. This isn't as big of a deal breaker as getting a guitar with a floating bridge or a bad nut. However, I think you should be looking for guitars that are fairly simple in terms of electronics. I know there are a lot of guitars out there with a lot of knobs. You can get a lot of guitars with push-pull knobs, with all sorts of different pickup configurations, and it can get really overwhelming. So I would really recommend you avoid those types of guitars, because for the most part, you're probably not going to use all of the different configurations of the electronics. You're going to play with everything dialed up to 10, and you should be focusing a whole lot more on playing the correct notes at the correct time, rather than focusing on getting the best tone. Tone comes with time, but if you develop bad habits as a new player, you're going to be worse off than learning how to play cleanly and then dialing in a tone later on. This is my Epiphone 339. It's a very good budget guitar. I think it does a whole lot of things right. And it has these push-pull pots. And what these do is they turn these humbucker pickups into something that sounds a whole lot closer to a single coil pickup. And it gives you a whole lot of versatility. It gives you a lot of configurations. And you could think, wow, that comes in handy. You could potentially use all of that, but realistically, as a beginner, you likely won't. And what you're risking is having a guitar that can do a whole lot of stuff and you focusing on learning how to do that stuff rather than how to play your guitar better. Another example is my Fender Mexican-made Player Stratocaster. This is a guitar that I bought secondhand, and it has the David Gilmour mod. And what that allows you is to mix and match the pickup configuration in a way the traditional wiring of a Stratocaster doesn't allow you to, which is great. However, I struggle to remember what the configurations actually are and which one is which. So I needed to make myself a little diagram just to remember how to get the different pickup configurations with the mod on. So again, I think your time is best spent learning how to play the right notes at the right time rather than dialing fancy pickup configurations. Okay, mistake number 4. Now, this might not be applicable to you or everyone. However, I think you should be getting a guitar that is quite versatile. As I said, my first guitar was an Ibanez Geo. Now, the guitar I got is okay. It has some humbucker pickups. It does distortion quite okay, but the clean tones, the overdriven tones, the softer touch type of genres, it doesn't really do that well. The pickups sound pretty muddy, so it's a guitar that I don't really use on any of my songs, and I'm planning on changing the pickups because of that very reason. So while buying a guitar that you can later on mod is a good idea, and I think you should consider that, I think it's really important to not worry about any of that and spending a lot more of your time and effort and money and energy into a guitar that is going to be versatile enough for you to experiment with different genres with, rather than pigeonholing yourself into something that's too specific. And finally, mistake number 5 is buying a guitar that has a poor build quality. I know that with a better build quality comes a higher price point. However, lately we've been spoiled for choice when it comes to budget guitars and just how good they've been getting. So you can probably find a very good instrument for not a whole lot of money. But I think it's really important that you buy a guitar that has good bones to it and a guitar that you can grow into, even if you're going to mod it later down the line. at least get something that's going to have a decent body and a decent neck, because those are the things that you're likely not going to change. Buying a new neck costs a whole lot of money, and you're better off probably buying a new guitar at that point. So at the very least, I think you should buy a guitar with a reasonable quality body, with a good neck, decent frets. Everything else you can probably change later on if you really need to. The more you have to spend on a guitar, especially in the budget range, likely the better features going to have on it, although that's not always true. But for the most part, you can replace electronics, you can replace tuners, you can replace the nut. If you have to, you can replace bridges, saddles, all the hardware. Those bits can be changed with aftermarket parts if you get the type of guitar that's easy to mod. But you're going to have a lot harder time with finding an affordable neck, and you're not likely going to change the body. Now here's an example of what I think is a pretty good guitar. I think it has good bones on it. The body is quite good. The neck on it is quite good. Now it came with some very scratchy and not very nice to play frets, but that's a very easy thing to do with just a bit of steel wool or with a fret polishing kit if you want to get fancy about it, or fret rubbers or whatever. So just focus on getting the basics right, and everything else is going to fall into place. And why your very first guitar should be a Telecaster. Okay, so why should your very first guitar be a Telecaster? Now, I think this guitar is a solution for all the problems that I highlighted. The bridge is fixed, and I think a fixed bridge is going to work for you a whole lot better than any moving bridge, whether it's a Stratocaster style bridge or a floating bridge or a Bigsby. Really, any static bridge I think is a better shout for a beginner than a moving bridge. The nut, it may or may not, depending on your luck, be very well cut. I was very lucky with mine. I didn't need to do anything to it. With more budget guitars, you might have to have the nut looked at by a technician. You can just go do the third fret, first fret thing that I showed you earlier, and you should be golden. Okay, next is simplicity. It really doesn't get much simpler than the Telecaster. You could argue that the Esquire is a whole lot simpler because it's missing the neck pickup. It only has a bridge pickup in it. But realistically, I think 2 pickups, 1 volume, 1 tone, the 3-way switch works really, really well. And you don't need to get a whole lot more complicated than this to write awesome music or to play awesome music. Number 4 is versatility. The Telecaster is known to have been played by a bajillion players on all sorts of different music types, from rock to metal to country. And I think from the 6-ish songs that I released so far, the Telecaster is probably on all but 1 of them, or maybe 2 of them. If I don't use it as my main guitar, I'm always going to use it for a background part. It's almost always in there because it always fits. The neck pickup is really warm and you can get these bell-like tones. The bridge pickup is a whole lot punchier and harsher, and the bridge pickup through a Marshall Plexi style amplifier I think sounds very rock and roll, and you get a whole lot of bang for your buck from just this one guitar that can fit so many different styles. Something else that makes the Telecaster such a versatile guitar is the fact that you can find it in a whole lot of different configurations. You can find Telecasters with 2 humbuckers, P90 pickups. You can find them in so many different configurations. So it's really just a matter of finding whichever one you think is right for you, whichever one looks right and feels right and suits the type of music that you want to make most of or you want to play most of. If it's guitar music, a Tele will likely be able to do it. And last but not least is build quality. Now, I think because of its simplicity, because it's just a slab of wood and a neck, couple of simple pickups. It's such a classic guitar. It's very difficult to mess up. Obviously, you are going to get lower quality instruments. I'm not saying that every Telecaster you touch, regardless of the price point, regardless of range of manufacturer, is going to sound good. But I think you can find a really good Telecaster for not a whole lot of money, and it doesn't need to be a Squier. There are so many different manufacturers that make them. Okay, but does the Telecaster have to be your first guitar? Well, No, you can get some pretty good guitars that are almost equally as versatile, almost equally as simple, like a SG. However, that historically has quite a bit of neck dive. And if you don't know what neck dive is oh, wait, this guitar doesn't have any neck dive. There we go. Or you could buy a Les Paul. It might not have the neck dive, but the tuning can be a bit of an issue. They're notorious for that. Also, the neck tends to be a little bit chunkier than a lot of newer players prefer. So it might be a little bit more difficult to pick up than something with a comfortable C neck. You could also get something like a 335 or a 339, and they are realistically very versatile guitars. The problem with them is that they can be quite big, especially the 335. They can be surprisingly heavy, especially for semi-hollow body guitars. So there is always a bit of a trade-off. And I think from all the different trade-offs, from all the different styles of guitars, the Telecaster has more of the pros and fewer of the cons. And this is why I think you should definitely consider one of these. But to be honest, the type of guitar you get doesn't really matter. As long as the bridge is fixed, really get yourself a fixed bridge guitar. But other than that, you can change parts, you can have it set up. What I think is the most important thing about your very first guitar is that you get the guitar that excites you. Yeah, my Ibanez stylistically doesn't fit me as well now, 13, 14 years later, and it doesn't play the type of music that I want to play right now. It doesn't suit the styles that I'm going for, but it was a really good beginner guitar. It made me want to play it more. It made me want to get better, and I really enjoyed playing it. I enjoyed looking at it. I enjoyed the experience of playing it a lot more than I thought I would have, especially when I was struggling to play the acoustic guitar that I was playing before. So it's really important that whatever guitar you get, you should get something that gets you excited or gets the person who you're gifting it to excited and makes them want to play it all the time. Cool, I hope this was helpful, and if you have any questions, just drop them in the comment section and I'll do my best to get back to you, and hope to see you next time.